Hey, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. A really interesting conversation started brewing in our Intuitive Awakening Facebook group. And I don't think it intentionally brewed, or it didn't hit other people maybe the same way that it struck me, because the conversation that I thought was super fascinating was sort of ancillary to whatever the main post was. And it was just like a really quick little interchange between two people that, to me, was at the heart of all the development work that we do based on our identity and other people's identity and trying to sort of suss all of this out. And it was basically two different quotes from personal development masters. Well, the second one, I don't know if you'd call her a personal development master, but she's definitely somebody who has a lot of insight. And it was these two different quotes that were brought up that almost appear as if they are in direct conflict with each other. The first quote was from Rumi, who very famous, like it's one of his most famous quotes, which is that if you are irritated by every rub, how will your mirror be polished? And this is something that I've put in blog posts, and I think we've mentioned it in other podcasts. And so it's a quote that's really kind of struck me as being very powerful. And the insinuation is that when we rub up against other people and they reflect back to us our behavior and we get irritated by that, then we aren't necessarily allowing them to be the mirror that they could be, so that we can see our behavior clearly in order to continue to grow and be, as Rumi said, polished. So that's on one side. And then on the other side of the conversation is a quote from Maya Angelou, which is essentially, and I'll just encapsulate it, that you trust people in how they show up. If they show up a certain way, trust that that's who they are, that they're not manipulating you necessarily. Or if they are, then trust that they're a manipulative person. Like, trust people as they show up. And you don't have to necessarily, and the insinuation is that you don't necessarily have to take that upon yourself and assume that this is a reflection back to you of who you are. This is who they are, and you trust that, and you work with that information. So then the question becomes, is every person in our life, and especially if they're an irritant to us, are they reflecting back to us things about ourselves that maybe we don't like to see? Or is that their business? That's just them. That doesn't necessarily have anything to do with us, and we should trust that they're showing up authentically for them and see that as none of our business. And is there something in between these two things that is sort of an ideal place to land in development and growth?
You know, as I go down my journey of life, I'm learning how to keep power separate between people. So when someone shows up, however they are, like you're talking about, I'm learning more and more to say that is how they are showing up right now, whether it's authentic to them or whether there's something they need to work on or whatever. That, to some degree, I guess how I see it in a personal way is it's none of my business the work they have to do. I mean, and yet we built a business around it in some ways. Like at Personality Hacker, we talk a lot about personal growth, using ourselves almost like guinea pigs. And the people that end up coming around, you listening right now, you're probably attracted because we talk about personal growth and we talk about examining your own life and the lives around you and trying to become calibrated to a higher standard, whatever that means for you. And yet I'm still trying to get to a place where I don't feel like I have to quote unquote correct everyone around me all the time or fix them or help them get better at who they are. I'm really resting into this. Oh, this is how this person shows up. This is authentic for them. I mean, with limits. If they're harming somebody or hurting someone directly, I usually step in and say something, or I'll have issue with that. But often when people are just acting the way they're acting, I shrug and go, well, that's that person. I mean, that's how they are in the world. So I'm learning how to do this. And I think for me, that's been a growth stage for me, to be able to just allow people to be who they are in whatever context they show up in.
Right. Well, and if you add that concept of humans being plastic and not static, then the way that we would articulate that based on past podcasts is that we would not nominalize the word are, like that's who they are, but we turn it back into a verb and say that's how they are-ing, or that's how
exactly.
That's how they're ising. Like that's how they're showing up for the moment in their evolution. And they may have showed up differently in the past, and they may show up differently in the future, but that's where they're at in this phase.
Well, and I think it came, for me personally, it came from examining myself, how I'm showing up. How am I joling, Joel-ing, how am I joling through the world, and the self-awareness that I'm trying to develop to say, oh, I see what my ego is doing there. I see why I'm showing up this way, or I see why I'm acting nervous around this person. They're making me feel weird or whatever. I think those insights have helped me look at other people and go, it's probably going on very similar for them. As an ENFP, I use that authenticity process in my personality, or what technically is called introverted feeling. It's almost this idea that the more personal something is, the more universal it is. So when I have a personal experience with something, I tend to go, I wonder if a lot of other people have this personal experience too in a very similar way. So the closer I get to what's personal for me, the more I'm able to realize, oh, this is probably going on for a lot of other people. Maybe they're unaware of it. Maybe they don't know it's happening. Maybe they're not willing to admit it to themselves or others, but that's probably approximately what's going on for them. So that's been something for me that's really helped me see other people, like see you, Antonia, as Antonia, or you listening as listening in the world, whatever. But you get the point that it's something that as self-examinations brought out for me, which goes back to the other quote by Rumi, which about the rub on the mirror, right?
Yeah. The
rubs that I've gotten in life are what caused me to go down the road of self-examination. The rubs are what have caused me to go, wait, why did that feel like a rub? Why did I not like that touching me? Why did I not like that person's whatever vibe, or the way they made me see something about myself I didn't want to see? What was it about that? And examining that has caused me to get to the other place. So I don't necessarily see those two as incompatible. I almost see them as very much compatible, integrated in some ways.
Yeah. I guess it would be the listenering.
The listenering, yeah.
You, the dear listenering, in your evolution, in your constant plastic state. I think what you just mentioned, which is, as far as I'm concerned, the brilliance of the introverted feeling or authenticity process, is this ability to understand just how much texture is inside of each one of us. I don't think I really understood this idea that there was a lot of different voices inside of me, all with sometimes very different agendas. Lots of different parts of who I am are all sort of vying for attention and grabbing megaphones, and different contexts bring out different parts of who I am. And I think it was really talking to people who have introverted feeling or authenticity that truly helped me understand this principle. And I think back to the concept of whenever we get triggered or whenever we get rubbed in a negative way and we respond to it, is this that this person is reflecting back to us something that we don't like about ourselves? Or is it that they're just showing up as they are and that's none of our business? And I think, like you said, I feel like these are compatible thoughts too, because I think the answer is both. I think it's both that people reflect back to us things that we don't like about ourselves, or maybe just aspects of who we are that we're seeing in other people. And the mirror provides us not just that they're reflecting back something we don't like, but actually where we're at in the progress of that particular thing. And I think that's why sometimes we'll see terrible behaviors and recognize terrible behaviors in another person, and it won't really impact us that much. We wouldn't be able to see them in another person if we didn't have the capacity to understand it. And once we understand it, it means that we've been able to identify, at least in part, that in ourselves, right? Like everybody has the emotional wheelhouse inside of them. Everybody has the ability to do all the really terrible things that have been done on the planet. I think this is one of the reasons, again, why introverted feeling or authenticity people sometimes feel like they're the only ones on the planet that truly understand evil, and then they start to feel bad about themselves because they recognize all this evil inside of themselves, the dark parts, and nobody else is owning up to it. And it's not that the rest of us don't have those dark parts of us, it's just we're not as in touch with all of the different chambers inside, and so we're not looking at them as much. But if my introverted thinking or accuracy goes really deep down inside, I can find some really dark chambers in there. So it's not that I don't have them, I'm just not paying attention to them. I'm paying attention to other things that are more interesting to me. So I think when we observe terrible behavior in other people, it's a reflection back to us. Not that we're terrible people necessarily, but it is a reflection back to us of those darker parts of who we are, which is how we can identify them in other people. And then the mirror lets us know where we're at with that particular dark part. Is it something that's overwhelming us? Is it something that we're struggling with that causes us a problem? Is it a challenge? And if the answer is yes, we're probably going to have a visceral response to it. We're probably not going to like that because we don't like that person is reminding us of where we're at. On the flip side, if we've done work around it, or maybe it's just never been something that's been our issue, it's a very quiet part of who we are, and it's universal, so it's inside of us, but it's not really a thing for us. Usually we look at people doing the little dance, whatever that dance is, and we go, okay, that's just their thing. It's not necessarily mine. So it's both. And I think where we fall on that spectrum of whether or not we recognize that this person is reflecting back to us bad behavior, and our ego's getting all triggered and we're getting all like, all carbonated and fizzy and like, oh, I can't handle that. Or if we just hold space for it and say that's that person where they're at, they're inging whoever they are, whatever their ego or identity is, that's just where they're at in this phase. And it doesn't really strike us personally. It probably means that when the mirror was put up, we realized that we're cool on that. It's probably going to be okay. And this is something that like we're a mirror for them, right? Like we're providing the same service back, and our calmness around it is probably providing a mirror back to them of that they're not calm. Like two people dancing, and one person stops dancing, the person who's still dancing will sometimes feel self-conscious around it because nobody wants to be the only one in a dance, right? You usually feel self-conscious around it. So we're mirroring back to them or reflecting back to them their behavior, and that's probably not doing good things for them in that moment. I mean, if it's something that they're working on.
So I had this experience recently where you and I were both in conversation with somebody who is into personal development, or at least that's kind of the framework they come to life. That's their profession, is helping people through a personal development journey. And, a lot of it's around, confronting yourself and calling truth on yourself and really getting in touch with what's authentic for you. And so we were talking, and what I usually do in those frameworks is I start to get vulnerable with myself and start to speak out some things. And then if I have things that are triggering me, like, this person and I were like, I could feel the tension point almost. I think they might have also used introverted feeling. I'm not sure. That's my guess. I felt this tension point, this friction point. So I just called it out. I said, hey, I'm feeling friction toward this, and called it out, expecting the person to play and to dance and to unpack that and journey down the road with me why that might be the case. For whatever reason, this other person was unwilling to go down that road with me. And it's been bothering me for a few days since the event happened. It's been in my head. It's been bothering me. And I'm like, why is this bothering me? And the first place I go is, this is my instinct through training now, is to say, okay, obviously I'm triggered around something, or triggered is a harsh word I think a lot of people take umbrage with because it's like an intense word. I won't use triggered. I feel issue with something. Something inside me doesn't feel right. I feel out of alignment. Something feels icky. I don't like how I feel right now. I've got to sort through the feelings I have that this person didn't bring up, but were brought up around this person. So my first instinct that I've trained myself to do is to go, what is it in me that I don't want to see right now? What is the rub against my mirror that I'm wanting to avoid? Why am I resisting? Why am I feeling this feeling? What is it about this experience? And I haven't been able to find it yet. It's frustrating me because I'm assuming it's got to be there. If I had such a visceral reaction, it's got to be there. And I feel like I'm really good at this. Like I'm kind of like now doubting myself. Like I feel like I'm really good at rooting out my own biases and what's triggering to me. And now it's frustrating. And maybe that's what it had to illustrate. Maybe that's the thing. I just answered my own question in saying that. But my thoughts are, well, maybe sometimes the rubs maybe there isn't something you have to work on. Maybe as you do this enough, just like anything, if you get good at something, sometimes you realize when you have some proficiency built. Don't rest into that, Joel. That's what I tell myself. Don't rest into that. Don't get arrogant about it. But maybe you've built some skill to where you look and you don't see something, and that's okay. Like there wasn't necessarily something in you that had to be wrong or bad or off. I don't even like using wrong or bad anymore. I use calibrated, uncalibrated. Something that wasn't calibrated to your authenticity or introverted feeling. Like maybe that was just something that just came up. It was an anomaly. Maybe it speaks more to this other person than you, and that's okay. Allow them to do their thing, be who they are in the present moment, and you don't have to even create a story about how you're needing to recalibrate yourself. So that's, at the time of this recording, a few days after this event, that's kind of where I'm settling down to. But it's been a weird experience for me, because usually I can almost always find something why I reacted so strongly. And I did have a strong reaction in that scenario.
I mean, to add a little bit more context, we don't have to name any names. It's not like anybody's going to find out what, like any of the players beyond us. But this was actually a person who is a personal development guru. Like, this is a person who's, got a bit of a name for themselves in the personal growth industry. And I think one of the things that this person was bringing up is the real fear of imposter syndrome. Like, they're playing at a certain level that indicates that they know what they're talking about. And it wasn't too long into the interview where we started looking at each other going, I think that this person figured out a trick. They figured out a trick of being massively present, like just 100% truly present. But they had also figured out the trick of only ever experiencing whichever emotion that they wanted to feel while they're being totally present, which from us, what we experienced was a reality distortion field. And, in like the true style of us, we kept trying to get to the more, like, we wanted to get to the more transparent level, not just tricks of what they had done to feel better, but like, what was their journey and what were some of the struggles they experienced, and like to really lay it on the line. And this person is known and famous for, telling the truth. And so we were like, okay, cool. So we'll be able to get some like real authentic history for how a person struggles during their growth transition, and then actually be able to create some context that would be helpful in content. And they just wouldn't do it. Like, they just totally refused to go down any road of transparency or honesty. They just wanted to talk about this trick and the presence work. And admittedly, I don't know if I've known very many people that were as present to the moment as this person was. So they had definitely built that skill to an admirable level, but it didn't come with, my impression is that it wasn't being developed concurrently with work, like the work, which is the cognitive dissonance flush outs and like really getting down to the nitty gritty of like transparency and truth. And of course, this is just our story. This is just our interpretation of this person. They may show up completely differently for other people, but that was just sort of our impression. And there was a sense of like, is this person the real deal? And in this world of development and growth and giving advice to people, imposter syndrome comes up like crazy, because like, who am I? Who am I to tell other people how to live their life? Who am I to give advice on what you should be doing? I don't know. I'm a person who yesterday I blew up at my kid. Like, so, who am I to say anything? And I think that may have been the mirror part that was so disconcerting, is this idea of like, you can get pretty high up there and maybe not be a person who should be telling other people how to live their lives. And so I think that might have been a piece of it, is the imposter syndrome. But but what's interesting about that experience, and thank you, by the way, Joel, for being willing to, open the kimono and reveal what was going on for you. And, use a specific example, because now we can sort of, fillet that out and look at it in detail. But I think looking at those two concepts, that we, like, other people are a mirror for us, and they reflect back to us where we're at, with a sense of maybe of modesty, which means that we know where we're at with all the good and the bad. And also at the same time, it's none of our business where they're at, because we're providing a mirror for them as well. And also, people show up how they show up, and that's kind of none of our business. So I think what's so great about that situation is that you used it as an opportunity to have a mirror, while at the same time not judging the individual and letting this person be wherever they're at. This person is where they're at in their journey. They're inging in whatever way that they're inging, and that's none of our business.
Yeah, it's kind of this idea of get your own house in order. I mean, that's like the first thought that comes to my mind. And I I probably have erred on that side in my life of, okay, how can I apply this to me? Or what's the thing I got to fix here? And I think I'm actually trying to get less, like I'm actually working, my personal growth journey at this point is to try to not just always assume that I'm the one, not at fault, but uncalibrated. Sometimes my reactions can come because I am calibrated. And the other person, like it's such a stark contrast that I have to realize, oh, it's the other person who's so uncalibrated, but I just assume everybody else is, and I'm the one that needs to calibrate. Like that's my kind of baseline assumption. And I'm definitely stepping into my own power and my own framework around that to say, no, I think I've got some stuff together in my life more than, I can almost get righteous, like self-righteous about rooting out all the cognitive dissonance and all the stuff that's quote unquote uncalibrated or wrong with me. And that's almost like a form of pride in of itself as well, right? It's like this way, I'm the most humble and willing to work on myself than anybody around. And that can also be a form of pride in itself going down that road. So I think that's another thing you have to watch for as you go down this is I could start to rest into that and think I'm better than anybody or other people because of that reason.
I think the other thing that comes up and why for you, your journey of understanding that you're not always the person, quote unquote, at fault or uncalibrated is that the more rested and present you get and the more you're authentically doing the work, people who are attracted to that will rest into you and it's interesting to see how the more personal development work that I do, the more people think of me as a leader because I've never considered myself in a leadership position. Not really. Like I have a lot of stuff around leadership. And so that's been my growth process too, is kind of making peace with the concept of leadership. But people who want that, who authentically, genuinely want to be at a better place will see you as somebody who might have something to say. But at the same time, if a person is really wrestling with something that's massive dissonance and they're not ready to let it go, you will be very polarizing for that person. You will be a massive turnoff. I've also noticed that. I've noticed that I've massively turned some people off. And I mean, it could just be because like sometimes I'm obnoxious. So I don't want to say it's because I'm like super developed. Like I could just be actually irritating to some people and that's okay. Like I get that. But it's more that when I show up as my best self and a person responds in kind of a kooky dook sort of way, I'm a mirror for them too. So their kooky dookness doesn't necessarily mean that they're reflecting back to me something that I don't like. It might be that I'm reflecting back to them something that they don't like or reflecting back to some that they're not ready to face. So I think it's really important to remember that if somebody treats you in a very like sort of weirdly destabilized way, it might not be that they're reflecting something toxic inside of you, or it could be the opposite, that you're reflecting health to them. And that's something that's like kind of weird from their perspective. I, on the other hand, have always like been very good, and maybe true ENTP style, I don't know, but very good at noticing everybody else's problems and being totally blind to my own. That was like the thing I was really good at, is diagnosing what everybody else should be doing in their life and thinking it was super simple, and then just completely and totally ignoring the fact that my life was completely falling apart around me. So that's why recognizing that the growth starts from within was such a profound thought to me. It's like, oh, wait, I've got work I've got to do too. So all of my stuff was remembering that when I saw something I didn't like in the outside world, I had to remember that this was a reflection back to me. And the more I'll use the word triggered too, because I don't know what the more neutered word for triggered is at this point. So I'll just use it and you'll have to forgive me or not. You don't have to forgive me. I'll just going to use it anyway. But I'm going to use the word triggered because I don't know of a better word. So if you, the listener, has a better word, just let me know what it is in the comment section and go, use this word instead. This is the more PC term at this point. But I find that when I get triggered by other people's behavior, in the past, it was super easy for me to figure out why they're behaving the way that they are on all the changes they needed to make. And for me, it was just this massive insight to go, yeah, and you've got that inside you too. So why don't you go inside and figure out why this is bothering you? Not that it just is, and not that it's just a part of the human makeup, and that it's a part in some chamber, and that part of you is, not overwhelming and doesn't have a megaphone and doesn't have it's not steering the ship. If that's the case, if it's all as it should be, I'm not going to get triggered. I'm just going to recognize that this is the human condition and hold space for the other person like I hold space for myself. But if I'm in a tizzy around it, if I hate that they've done it and I get really pissed off at them and upset and mad, well, what's going on for me? Like, what's happening internally? What's happening inside? And that's been just a massive frame shift for me. It's been super powerful to recognize that if I'm upset by this, if this is doing something to me, I probably need to get my house in order. So again, when we look at these two sides of maybe the same coin, which is that other people are creating a mirror for our experience, and if we're irritated by every rub, how will our mirror be polished? And on the other side, trusting people as they show up and trusting how that they're showing up their authentic self, and that may or may not have anything to do with you. I don't believe they're incompatible. I think they're just two different tools, and one of them might be more powerful for you. For me, the Rumi tool is more powerful. Remembering that other people are helping me with my mirror. For you, Joel, it might mean that letting other people be as they are, and that's not, or are-ing, and that's not your business, right? That might be the more powerful tool for you in the moment. I don't think that they necessarily are in opposition. I think that they're just two different perspectives that will help you out on your journey depending upon which one of those is the more powerful aha for you. What
I've come down to is obviously the little rubs in life can be little rubs, right? It's about specific things. Maybe I've got like an issue around something specific in my life when it comes to my kids, and somebody says something and it triggers me, quote unquote, and I get upset by the little rub and I get defensive and I'm like, I need to see this thing about my kids, and I change something or I resist the person that offered it and say, no, I think I'm doing the right thing around my kids. There's an overarching principle here in general, I think, that all the rubs come under, as far as I can tell. It's a sense of not owning your stance or being insecure in who you are as a person or how you're showing up to the world. And I think that really is at the heart of what we're like when we're looking at the rubs or people showing up as who they are. The thing that we're trying to get to is that feeling of permission and security in who we are as a person showing up to the world at the time we're showing up to it. And I think what the rubs do is they're an opportunity for us to look at the insecurities that we have, overarching insecurities that we have. And probably my gut tells me that a lot of the little rubs are tied to a bigger node of insecurity for us on some bigger level. And like that's where my mind is going right now. As we're talking about this, I'm starting to drill down into my heart and my mind and say, most times when somebody does something that mirrors back to me something that I'm like, ooh, I don't like how I'm feeling right now, or I don't like that thing in that other person. If I was secure in who I was showing up in that environment or showing up for that specific thing, I don't think it would be much of a rub. It would just be like, okay, well, it's almost like I own myself around this. I don't need to be insecure about this. So I really don't care what your opinion is. I've already vetted and examined myself around this, and I feel totally rested in. It's the moments when I feel insecure about my position. It's the moments when I feel like, oh, maybe I don't have this calibrated, or I'm very unsure of myself in this role or in this placement right here. And that to me is where I try to look more. So I think what I'm using is my internal calibration. Now I'm guessing other personality types would do this differently. This is me for introverted feeling, is I align it to what's something that's insecure for me on a higher level or a deeper level. And that's where I probably should put more focus and attention. If I own myself around this and there's a rub, it's probably just a conflict. It's probably just something in the outside world. It's just that person inging and being themselves and showing up how they show up, and me showing up as Joeling, and maybe we just don't see eye to eye. But I totally rest into my presence, and I own that about myself, that I have this stance. So I think there's something around insecurity here of us, and I think that's more the heart of the issue for these rubs than anything else.
Yeah. Well, and the more sensitive to the rubs you are, the more you're probably onto something. It's if you're super sensitive around something and you find yourself consistently being triggered, or whatever is the more neutered term for triggered, if you just find yourself consistently being offended or indignant or overwhelmed or whatever else is the emotional experience of somebody knocking against you and that not truly not being okay, this is a service to some extent. This kind of goes back to our podcast on the drama triangle versus the empowerment dynamic. Are you a victim or are you a creator? Is the person a villain or are they a challenger? Whenever we have these situations, these are challenges that help guide our path to what's actually going on for us. And sometimes it's legit healing work. Like we've got major traumas. We're massively oversensitive. We've been rubbed very raw. We've got nerves exposed, and it's a big deal. And that lets us know you need some healing. Like that might be a time of radical self-care and maybe seeing a therapist and, like really going down a healing path. Or if you're not massively rubbed raw, if you don't have these exposed nerves, if you're just dealing with like a general sense of like everybody seems to be sort of irritating to you, or these kinds of people are frequently irritating, then it's just a matter of attending to it and allowing whatever dissonance is going on inside of you or anything that you don't want to see, let that be a guide to the things you don't want to see. And eventually the goal, of course, is to get to a transcendent state where you still experience the rubs, but they're not overwhelming to you. You can still get, not that I've arrived, I'm not transcendent. I still get irritated all the time. Like I'm constantly getting irritated by little things, especially with people who are super close to me.
It's true.
It's so true. But it's a matter of recognizing that the reason why, like, you have the ability to be a quote unquote irritant to me because I've let you into the deepest, most intimate parts of who I am, where there's lots of little fragile things. And the work that we do of greater and deeper intimacy means that you're bumping up against things that I might not even know is inside of me yet. So it's profoundly important work to do that. Whereas the overwhelming majority of people, when they do the things they do that are irritating, it's just kind of like, meh, that's just the thing they're doing. And I like that I've gotten to that place. I like that my irritants are usually born of extreme intimacy. And I think that that's something that, I don't think that that's out of people's reach. I think that's something that you can definitely get to. But I don't think anybody's arrived on this. And it's definitely a matter of using the tools available that are the most appropriate for your situation.
I think it would be interesting to hear your story. You've been listening to this. You have a story around the rubs you have in life and the triggers that happen for you. Or maybe the place you've gotten to where you just let people be who they are and it doesn't affect you anymore. You're able to own who you are. Maybe it's stratified. Maybe certain areas of your life you own yourself more than others. I would love to hear, and I think the community would benefit from your story. If you would come over to personalityhacker.com and share your story directly below this podcast, we can get a conversation going around it where other people of like minds like yourself, we can have a dialogue, a conversation. We can help spot some of these things and come up with some ideas around this co-creatively. I think it'll be a great idea. So I encourage you right now, come over to personalityhacker.com, leave a comment, ask a question, get involved in the discussion. You can also do that over at facebook.com/personalityhacker, or we're also on Twitter, twitter.com/personalityhack, HACK.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you're feeling particularly generous, you can leave us a rating and review on iTunes. It really helps us out a lot.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.